Grace, peace, mercy, and sustenance from the bread of life, Jesus the Christ. Amen. This story is hard to believe. Maybe we could start pretty much every sermon like that. I don't know. But we've been walking through what's called the narrative lectionary since the beginning of September. So we're walking through kind of the overarching arc of the Bible. And we hit these stories where it seems like this is a lot to force upon us. Really, really did this happen? And of course, sometimes we try to explain it. I imagine, I'm making this up, but I imagine people have tried to explain what happened out there in the wilderness. You know, perhaps the yeast reacted with some kind of sea air and some sugar, and it made this flaky substance over the course of 40 years, and they scraped it together just enough. And then, you know, the migration of quails got a little off, and so it just went through the desert. I don't know. I'm sure people have tried to explain it this way. On the other hand, I know, too, that perhaps some just think of it as a fairy tale myth, you know, a story with a moral to it, just like an Aesop's fable. But as we've gone through these stories, we've noted that they're not really either of those things, not something to be explained away, and yet not something to be brushed aside, but rather a confession of faith. And when you dig into these stories, this one not least of which, boy, does it contain so much truth of faith and life. The people are hungry. You ever been hungry? They've just been freed from the tyranny of generations of enslavement in Egypt. And whatever leftovers or lunches they packed for the journey have run out. We hear they've been wandering a month and a half. It was the 15th day of the second month since they were released. Roughly 45 days. How long would it take you to start complaining? I kind of have to give it to them. I'd have started grumbling sooner. And they're not only hungry, they are hangry. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If we had only died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out in this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Or hanger. 45 days ago, they were rejoicing like crazy, dancing and singing and praising God on the other side of the Red Sea. And now, if only we had died in Egypt. I think I could relate. After all, we had something to eat back then. And you have to love Aaron and Moses and Aaron's response to this. Did you notice? Hey, don't take it out on us. It's not our fault. Your complaint is with God. You ever get hangry with God? It reminds me of the old candy bar Snickers commercial, when there are a bunch of young guys playing football, and one of them is betrayed by the actor Betty White in her 90s. And they come to the huddle, and they say, "Mike, what's wrong with you? You're playing like Betty White out there." To which she is given a Snickers bar and then turns back into a young man. And the tagline says, "Hungry? You're not you when you're hungry. Why wait?" We're not ourselves when we're hungry. The people complain, and God hears and responds. I note that how God responded, despite thinking of it as miraculous, is really not all that grandiose. Just a thin, flaky substance on the ground. We noted, too, that this might have taken some time to gather up each day. With a rock to scrape it into some vessel. And it said each person should get an omer, which is about 2/3 of a gallon. How long would it take to scrape all that together each day for each person in the household? Isn't it interesting to note that part of manna in the wilderness included some work to do, some chores, to keep busy and occupied, some responsibilities. Part of daily bread is being called to certain tasks. And then not overworked either, because not only are you not yourself when you're hungry, you're not yourself when you don't rest. God is against workaholism even in the wilderness. Did you notice? If you went out and tried to collect more than your allotment, whatever you collected over disappeared. And if you tried to save any to the next day, it rotted. And on the 6th day, you were to gather twice as much. So then, what could you do on the 7th? Rest. Take a break. It's interesting, in verses later, it says people still went out on the 7th day and they didn't find anything. One commentator said, sometimes it's easier to get the people out of Egypt than it is to get Egypt out of the people. Ain't it the truth? So what do you do with all this? Well, I've been gathering stories this week. One person reflected this week upon when their loved one died, and then they were surprised and comforted that one of the things that happened was that friends and neighbors and people from the church brought food to get them through. And isn't this story kind of like that? Another person reflected the story of their grandmother, which was told often that when there were times of extreme, there was a time of on the farm which was extremely lean, and out of nowhere, seemingly neighbors showed up to share provisions. Isn't this story kind of like that? I remember being a kid. Living near the Iowa border, we would take an annual trip to the lake in northern Minnesota. It would take about 7 or 8 hours in the car. And so we would load into the 1980s Ford Crown Victoria, me and my 2 sisters in the back seat. There was an elder woman in our church at that time who didn't have any grandkids, and so we were kind of surrogate ones. And she was experienced in making homemade chocolates. And so Jill would send us with a brown paper sack for each of us, me and my sisters, and in that sack were smaller sacks, which might read, "Open in Rochester." And then a next one, "Open when you get to St. Paul." "Open at Hinckley." And in each one would be a chocolate or a little game or a coloring sheet and crayons. You talk about manna from heaven, right? Not only for us kids, but for my parents. So we didn't turn into gremlins in the back seat. You're not yourself when you're hungry. Lord, have mercy. Isn't that what this story is like? And then I remember a story from a book called Sleeping with Bread. Maybe some of you have encountered it. It tells of the story from near the end of World War II, when there were so many children who were orphaned by the war. And in one place where they were caring for these children, a psychologist decided to give each child a piece of bread to hold when they went to sleep. And it calmed their anxieties and their fears. It assured them that they had food today and there would be some tomorrow. Isn't that what this story is about? None of those things are very grandiose in scale. And yet all of them have miraculous impact. I love when the people go out and they finally see the manna for the first time. Did you notice what they say? What is it? And in fact, that's what manna literally means. It means, what's it? Moses has described, in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord. What is it? Sometimes, perhaps, maybe we're no different. We might be looking for the glory of the Lord in some majestic, huge, obvious, big lightning bolt of overwhelming magnitude. Could it be that God's glory is actually more often and daily displayed in the what's it? Any of you remember or have to memorize Martin Luther's small catechism when you were a kid? At least one hand. Nobody else, really? Okay, there's a few of you. Any of you remember it? Okay. In the small catechism, Luther asks questions about the Ten Commandments, the Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. And the question he asks about each piece of it is, was ist das? Any of you know German? What is it? Exactly. So when it gets to give us our daily bread, Luther says, what's it? And then goes on to describe it. He writes, daily bread is everything included in the necessities and nourishment for our bodies, such as food, drink, clothing, shoes, house, farm, fields, livestock, money, property, an upright spouse, upright kids, upright members of the household, upright and faithful rulers, good government, good weather, peace, health, decency, honor, good friends, faithful neighbors, and the like. What's it? All those things are part of daily bread, the daily sustenance and nourishment that we have. And then he asks the questioner before this, why? Why pray this? He says God gives this stuff even to evil people, and even without our prayer. But we ask in this prayer that God cause us to recognize what our daily bread is, and to receive it with thanksgiving. Can we recognize our daily bread even in the wilderness? Can we see our daily bread as all these things and more? Jesus in the gospel says, I am the bread of life. And perhaps the true bread of life is the faith to see it. To be in relationship with God so deeply that we are taken up into that faithfulness. Jesus seems to get it. I am the bread of life, which sounds really strange. What is he talking about? Unless you hear it in faith. Jesus is the bread of life because in him we see and receive in our own heart and our soul and our mind and our body the activity and the relationship of God with us even in the wilderness, even in suffering. And oh, what manna that can be from day to day. Maybe it doesn't look all that grandiose, but we shall see the glory of the Lord. And we might say, what is it? And scrape it together. Amen.